What is it? We're the Downtown Advisory
Committee.
Committee, and it is 1:09 this afternoon. We're actually being driven by our consultants, as I understand it, and so I don't have an agenda in front of me, but I'll open the meeting at 1:09.
Okay. We have Caitlin Admeyer with Fries and Nichols. She's going to go through the downtown plan and the framework that we got from guidance from our last meeting and some of the public engagement from the last public engagement meeting as well. With that, I'll turn it over to Caitlin.
All right. Thanks, Drew. All right, yes, we will lead the agenda, so no worries there. You guys just have to sit back and relax. Again, my name is Caitlin Admeyer. I'm the project manager with Fries and Nichols, working on the comprehensive plan that includes 2 more detailed designs for small areas, one of which is the downtown and the other being the Nimitz Lake area. So we are here today, we're going to specifically talk about the preliminary concepts that we've been coming up with for downtown, as Drew said, both from feedback from the first Downtown Advisory Committee meeting, as well as what we heard from the community and some of the stakeholder meetings that we've been having. So yeah, just introducing ourselves. We got our team here as well. So all 4 of us are with Fries and Nichols. So happy to answer questions. Riley, Caroline, David. And then we'll talk a little bit quickly about prior meetings, kind of what we got from those, from the prior meeting, what we heard, kind of what we pulled out of it. And so it's a kind of a confirmation that we heard what you guys thought you were telling us. We want to make sure we heard what you were saying. And then we'll look at a concept that's being put together for the framework. I want to note that this is all preliminary. We did our engagements. We did our the last committee meeting. Well, Drew did the last committee meeting, but provided us with that recording. And so this is kind of our first time we're presenting publicly the concepts that came out of that. So all of this is still preliminary. This is all up for discussion. We can go back and change anything that you see here. So this is not, a finalized thing. This is very much a discussion and meant to be getting feedback from you guys that we can then go and make updates. And then we'll just have, once the presentation is over, we're happy to have as much or as little Q&A and discussion with the committee. And then we'll just talk about some next steps. So just to confirm, a downtown plan can be a lot of different things. It can take a lot of different forms. So just want to go back to make sure we understand what the purpose of the scope of work we've been given by the city. So it's adding detail to specifically this catalyst area of downtown that was identified in the Kerrville 2050 plan from 2018. So 3 meetings that we'll have here with the DAC. This is the second of those. The public engagements that we had one in, was it November, December? Maybe it was actually late October. Feels like yesterday. It was late October. We have another one this evening at 6 p.m. at the Arcadia, where we'll have stations presenting this information again to gather additional public feedback. We did a downtown analysis and a vision, and then public realm strategies. So that is something that's a little bit different about this plan than maybe some other downtown plans. There's not a big economics piece to this plan. We are asked to look really specifically at kind of the physical public realm elements. So the urban design, that kind of stuff. So there's not a lot about economics or businesses or that kind of thing. It's really talking about that public realm piece where the city is making investments that then support the broader goals of downtown. So we started this back in June of last year. We plan to wrap up in June of this year. So that's about when we would be planning to go to City Council for adoption of all 3 pieces of this plan. So we're kind of right here in the middle. We're doing chapter updates to the 2018 plan as well as these 2 area plans. So after this set of meetings today, we'll be going back, we'll be doing revisions and updates to that, and then carrying it on to the next step where we're talking about implementation. How do we get these things done? Just a little review of what we have done so far. So we have had 2 CPAC meetings. That's the Comprehensive Plan Advisory Committee. So they're looking at kind of the broader, all 3 of these pieces. We have another one after this at 4 p.m. So by this evening, we'll have 3 CPAC meetings. This is the second, so we've had 1 DAC meeting. This is the second. We had an online community survey that was open for 6 weeks over the summer, where some of this feedback that we got from that is what's incorporated into these recommendations. We had 1 public open house, again, back in October. We have the second tonight. And we have an online interactive map on the project website. That is still open. That will remain to be open pretty close until the end of our project. We kind of just leave that open for people to be adding comments to. And then we are periodically referencing that and seeing what ideas are coming out, incorporating those into the work. And then kind of at the end, we will close it at some point before adoption and kind of make sure we have all the final comments incorporated. So this is an example of the interactive map. As you might be able to see, there is quite a density of pinned comments in the downtown area specifically. So some of the themes that we're seeing specific to downtown is people want more small businesses and retail, a lot more integration to the river. We've heard a lot about that the river's there, it's this great resource, but we can't access it, we can't see it, you don't even always know it's there. So how do we address that? Improving roads and intersections. It's really important. It's also very difficult because TxDOT owns some of the right-of-way through downtown, and so there's limited things that the city has influence over, specifically like along Sidney Baker. And then just traffic safety and management. Again, some of that is the timing of the traffic lights that TxDOT controls in downtown. But some of these recommendations that we could possibly put forward, having things down on plans, can't force TxDOT to do anything, but it can be something that the city can then have to point to if they in conversations with TxDOT. So it can be influential. From the workshop that we had in October, I know that the DAC meeting kind of bled into December, but that was technically still part of that workshop 1. So we talked about assets, opportunities, things that we're missing or things that we might want to see changed in downtown. So of course the assets are some of the existing businesses, the river, some of the arts and cultural institutions that are here. There's opportunities for additional housing, enhancing foot traffic, just additional activities, festivals, and events that are drawing people into downtown. And on that same idea of the river is how do we connect onto that river trail? Some of the missing elements are maybe some art and culture events, more diversity of housing and restaurants and shops. Again, you saw housing coming up as a missing element in downtown, and that is really important. Housing in a downtown brings that kind of, we say 24/7, it's not all night, but it brings that evening and that weekend activity. So having a balance of businesses, offices, and housing in downtown is really important for creating kind of that year-round, day-round activity that's really important to support small businesses. And then historic preservation of buildings. It's actually really interesting. We had an early morning meeting this morning at the high school with some of the high school kids. And something they were really interested in was historic preservation. They were like, we've got some really cool buildings. We want to make sure those are around for our kids. So we're hearing that theme coming up more and more as well, even with your high school students. And if we could change one thing in downtown, crosswalk safety, more housing, extending into some of your adjacent assets. So downtown right now, a lot of people were telling us, it's the T, right? People were telling us it really just feels like it's that T right there with like Waters and Earl Garrett, right? And so people were saying there's more to it. What could be more? How could we expand that experience of downtown? And then just a little bit more pedestrian friendliness. This is one of the downtown boards from the engagement last time. So this is what we call a visual preference survey. We asked people, what are the kind of different residential types maybe that you could see in downtown, or commercial, or just some other assets? What we heard was a lot about mixed use. And mixed use can be different scales, right? Mixed use can be big. It can be more downtown scale. It can be 2-story mixed use, right? So mixed use, but in the downtown scale. Restaurants and possibly a hotel, food trucks, live entertainment. So I don't know that anything is super surprising there. I think that's what we were maybe expecting to hear, but it was nice to just confirm that with the community. And then we had a second visual preference survey about some specific elements. So the first one was kind of about land use and different use types. This one was about some specific things in the public realm. So lighting came up a lot, trees and landscaping. Cafe seating is an interesting one, just, allowing those restaurant uses to kind of spill out and activate the sidewalks of downtown. Alley activation, people were really interested in talking about alley activation, and we'll get into that a little bit in some of the concepts. And then just adding additional sidewalks and bike lanes. And we had a map talking about just mobility. So we saw a lot of needs for enhancing mobility elements, especially west of Sidney Baker along Water Street. And then again, that idea of that river access or that north side trail connecting down to the river trail coming up a lot. Last time we were, I guess when Drew was here, we gave the presentation and then the discussion happened later. So we talked with the DAC about strengths, opportunities, weaknesses, and threats. So a lot of repetition here that you see that we heard from the community as well, which is great. We like to see repetition because that allows us to kind of prioritize things, the things that are coming up over and over. Those things kind of start rising to the top in terms of priority. So again, history, walkability, infill, mixed use development, pedestrian connectivity, the daytime traffic. The parking garage underutilization is a really interesting one that keeps coming up because physically the parking garage is right there, right? It's a block or two from most of the main downtown stuff. So this idea of why isn't it being used more? What can we do to enhance that? I think that's a really big question to answer as part of this. The city put a lot, put some investment into that. The building of a parking garage is not cheap. And so having that asset is huge. I know a lot of downtowns that I've done work in that would love to have that parking garage 2 blocks from their main retail strip. So why isn't it getting utilized? What can we do to fix that? And then some threats are just, once you have this plan, what are you actually going to do? How are you going to get it done? And how are you going to ensure that the ongoing support, both from the city, but then also from the community, continues through implementation? So with that, that's kind of everything we've heard from the committee, from the community, from the online survey and the maps. So what did we do with all of that feedback? So with that, we started to create a series of maps looking at different things for downtown. And this is what we really call a framework plan, right? We're not looking at the individual businesses. We're not looking at what's really happening inside the blocks. So we're looking at that public realm that includes streets, that includes open spaces, networks of pedestrians, bicycles, traffic. So we're looking at all of the fabric of which then the businesses kind of fill in the pieces in between. So we started by looking at what we in conversations had identified as catalyst sites. So these are areas that are either ripe for a major redevelopment. So like you see the old mall site or the Entertain Mart, that those are some areas where you could see a larger, possibly a larger project happening that could really bring some different uses to downtown. Maybe this is where you get some of your mixed use, maybe you get some of your hotel development in these sites. And then the yellow is sites that were noted in the previous Catalyst plan from 2018 as more infill potential. So there's already some stuff there, but it's possibly going to be maybe getting redeveloped, or maybe there's some areas in between the existing uses that could be ripe for some smaller infill projects. And so the interesting takeaway on this one is obviously that giant mall site on the other side of the river. That's a huge opportunity. It's not technically in the downtown boundary, but we think it's really important, so we're kind of looking at it anyway. But you also see with the yellow, a lot of that potential is on that west side of Sidney Baker. And right now, most of the downtown activity is on the east side of Sidney Baker, but a lot of the potential is west. So what we are looking at in some of these concepts is then, all right, if we're thinking that the existing activity east of Sidney Baker is going to stay there and it's going to be enhanced, but then also that it might expand west of Sidney Baker. How do we make that connection, especially with that being a TxDOT right-of-way? So we also started then by thinking about different character areas of downtown. Your downtown is very large physically in terms of the study area, and we're using that Tirz boundary as our study area, but that's a lot of land. And the city has limited resources for investments in terms of that public realm. So identifying character areas kinds of helps us and the city understand different levels of investment. Where does the city put more investment? Where do they maybe put less, some but less, and then allow kind of the private sector to enhance it as kind of organic development happens. So we'll go into each of these specifically. The downtown core, right now this downtown core is about 6 blocks. It is a technical regulatory boundary right now. The main difference with that is that the parcels within that downtown core as it stands today are waived from parking requirements because they are in theory close to the garage. So part of what we're looking at is then expanding that downtown core, saying this is where the highest level of experience from a pedestrian perspective happens. This is where the highest level of investment in the public realm happens. This is where you really try to concentrate those really active uses that are creating that active public realm and pedestrian activity. So this is really the focus area of the downtown core. So maybe some lower scale vertical mixed use buildings, residential or office on upper floors with those really active ground floor uses. That's really important in a core. Hospitality, food and beverage, entertainment, boutique retail, all that kind of stuff. Of course, the public buildings and the cultural assets are kind of already existing in this downtown core as well. Pretty low scale, 1 to 3 stories. It's what's existing there already. Keep it that way. And then special considerations for this area include historic preservation, of course, those lowered parking requirements we just talked about. So if this is the downtown core that we agree on in this set of meetings, then we will go forward and do some of that analysis of what that means for those lowered parking requirements. This is likely where you're going to see those public events happening. And then, of course, the association with the river. Sure.
Will you have these as hard copies later? Because I can't read.
Yeah, it's hard to read it.
Yeah.
Especially the boundaries, I'd be curious to know.
Sure. Yeah. We do have a few hard copies, and we'll have them
I can have it later.
this evening as well. We'll have these like on a bigger board this evening,
Okay, great.
and then
Is it online anywhere that we could download it ourselves?
we haven't. It will be because Drew. Yeah, what do you want us to, because we can put stuff up online. We'll put whatever up online. Whatever Drew wants us to put up
We can
online.
put it on,
Because it is hard to see.
Yeah.
yes, yeah, we can put it on the project website.
Okay, yeah, so we could put the presentation up,
Yeah.
maybe, Drew? Does that sound
We
good?
typically put the presentations
Mhm.
up on the website, so.
That would be great.
Yeah.
So we could just use that QR code and it'll be.
Yes, we'll
Right.
do that.
Thank you.
It'll be there.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So then the next character area is the commercial corridor. This one's pretty straightforward. This is the corridor along Sidney Baker, kind of outside of that downtown core. It's probably not going to change a ton in terms of character. It's going to be your corridor commercial, typical kind of what you see today. Some amount of investment could be warranted in terms of just some better sidewalks, but even then, it's not a great pedestrian experience. And it has a lot of driveway cuts, so it's not necessarily safe to put a lot of people walking along there. So this is an area that we say maybe the city doesn't bother to do as much investment along this commercial corridor. And of course, as you can see, it actually goes quite a bit outside the technical downtown boundaries. There's really only 3 or 4 blocks. They're actually in the downtown boundaries here.
Is this a really old map? Because these buildings are not.
Yes, the
Okay.
building footprint
It's really hard
GIS
to
layer
follow
is
because
not
it's
accurate
not
on
what's
here.
currently built.
Correct, yes.
Okay.
The
Alright.
building footprint GIS layer is not up to date.
Okay. Alright.
We noticed that as well. I know the HEB, like when we get to the HEB part of stuff, the HEB is
Well,
not there.
and Valero's not there across from
Yeah.
the police station and, you know, anyway, there's all kinds of stuff that's missing.
Yeah, yeah, and this is the county's data where we believe, pretty sure it's the county's data, so there might be a conversation with the county about making sure the GIS data, the accurate GIS data gets updated. The third character area that that we've been talking about is what we're called supporting development. That's in the, yes,
I have a question.
sure.
If this was created in 2018 and supposedly 2015, how was the committee formed? Or who formed the committee? And when you say we, whom we talk about we, when you do?
Well, so-
Because I don't see no economic development. I don't see no future there in those plans. How do you come up to this plan?
So,
No, the reason I'm saying this, if I was to bring a group over here, there is no theater for 10 or 20,000 people here, or stadium,
sure,
and that benefits the small business. That's why I
Sure.
say, who created this committee? and
this
what
committee,
purpose?
who created,
The downtown, I'm a businessman.
Sure.
From downtown, I never been asked. So who created them?
yeah,
I can answer that.
yeah,
So City Council hired Freese and Nichols as a consultant to go through this plan. As Caitlin mentioned, this plan is really more of the public investment, not the economic market
yeah,
that the small businesses would control. And the Tirz board, along with a member of Main Street Board and the Historic Downtown Business Association, the board on the dais was appointed by City Council to oversee this part of the project.
Okay, if that's the case, so what I see over here, I think the purpose is great, but it does not cover the necessity of the economical growth of the city, because we just look in the little plan,
sure,
we growing, so the mayor has to look beyond personal interest or group's interest. It has to look beyond growth of the city in total.
yeah.
And I don't see that here.
And so that
Because
is,
I have a school that just been demolished. And they supposed to do something great.
yeah, and
Yeah,
that
I
is,
see the greatness that's there. So looks to me like we just catering certain interests over here. We need to grow.
yeah,
We need to grow in the purpose economically, not just for groups.
yeah,
We need to go put in contact the next city for the 2050 in reality,
sure, and that's
not
what,
just as a name
and
and
that,
to impress us. That does not impress me. If it's for 2050, why not 2024? Why
Sure.
not 2025? There is federal grants available. The city does not use. I want to know why. Because I did that in Bryan, College Station. It was run down like this, and we bring that Bryan College Station right now is a mecca to go for a weekend.
sure,
Why not?
yeah, absolutely.
Who is in the committee? Who names in the committee? He answered that. Maybe
Yeah.
we need to change some of the personnel from them
But-
with maybe with future Bryans.
And sir, this meeting is just for the downtown plan. We also have the comprehensive plan advisory committee meeting at 4 o'clock today that is looking citywide.
Yeah.
And at 6 o'clock at the Arcadia, we have a public engagement going over all of the proposal for the plan.
Yeah,
So-
so we are looking at the bigger picture as well. This meeting specifically will just be focused on downtown. So we are looking at the other stuff, yeah.
Mr. Mamani? No? Mr. Mamani?
Yeah, that's me.
Yes. I would love to see you come to city council and share some of your thoughts.
Yeah.
The city council meets every second Tuesday and fourth Tuesday at 6 o'clock. And the city council would want to hear from you. You own a beautiful building on Earl Garrett. You also own, right, the hotel up on Sidney Baker, and you own the little offices, the Edward Jones office on Sidney Baker. You have a very good interest in vision for the city, and you should come to city council and talk to them And another person you might want to talk to is Bill Rector, who's the head of the Historic Downtown Business Association, and you own a building in that association.
I did come over here to visit the council. They haven't not done anything yet about the drain during a storm.
Keep coming, don't stop. It's your persistence that works.
I don't have time to waste and mingle around.
Okay,
I bring the problem to the city.
okay.
They don't wanna listen, well, that's,
drainage issues.
I'm not gonna insist on that.
Okay, well,
I
you're
have
here,
to take
you're here
matters into
making
my own
comments.
hands.
Yeah.
I appreciate your comments.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I will say one of the next steps is kind of stealing thunder from a later slide, but one of our next steps then, once we kind of say that the framework that we're talking about sounds good or what we need to change for that, one of the next steps will be looking at more detailed infrastructure analysis. So if you have comments about like a drainage issues, we would love to hear
No,
those.
that's beyond the.
Oh, that's a different,
Yeah,
okay.
that's a different story.
okay.
He brought it up, the city council. So
Okay.
we're just answering his
Okay.
comment.
Okay. All right, so for supporting development, this is our blue areas. So these are areas where we see being able to have a lot of variety of uses. Some investment by the city in terms of some of the basics of sidewalks and lighting and safety issues like that. But not as high of an investment rate as you might see in the core. This is an area that would be great for adding some of that residential that we heard people talking about, missing middle residential or residential incorporated into like a 2 or 3 story mixed use building with like a business on the ground floor. This is also where we see the potential for downtown supporting uses that maybe aren't those pedestrian active uses. You know, it's not a cafe or a boutique where people are coming in and out a lot, but maybe this is where those CPA offices, things like that, that are still an important piece of the downtown fabric, but they're just not as much of an activity generator. But they're still, you know, within that downtown realm. So anticipated uses could be those mixed-use live-work units, additional small businesses, kind of those daily goods and services, and variety of residential projects. Still a lower scale, still that kind of 1 to 3 story scale. And the real consideration here is just then making sure that that area is still really well connected from a variety of modalities, so vehicular, bicycle, pedestrian, connected to get back down into that downtown core. And then we have what we're calling the transition zone. So if you look at the overall map, there's kind of like a little tail of the Tirz that goes down along the river down to Shriner. And so this transition zone is where we're seeing is kind of the nexus between your downtown core and what we'll talk about next, which is this university district. Similar rates of investment as what we were just talking about for the supporting areas, where it still has that basic pedestrian safety enhancements, but not nearly as much investment as you might see in the downtown core in terms of really creating that pedestrian experience. This is where we could start potentially seeing a little bit higher scale of development. So some of those same uses as the supporting areas, but maybe we start seeing things up to like 5 stories in this area. So this is where we might actually be able to start seeing some of that multifamily. There is already an apartment development down there. We could see maybe a bigger hotel happening here. And then again, the main considerations would be making sure it's still connected back to that core, and then also to the riverfront area, that if you're talking about a little bit more density, there could really be a lot of value in, this is where you get kind of that riverfront development. This is an area that still has some open land that you could possibly utilize for that really high value riverfront development. And then the final piece is what we're calling the university district. In the conversations with Shriner, we did specifically have a stakeholder group where we talked to some of the leadership over at Shriner. And one thing they really expressed was this idea that they feel like they're pretty close to downtown, but they're really not connected to downtown. And so we were, with this kind of tail end of the Tirz reaching all the way down to Shriner, we were thinking, how do you kind of both physically but also programmatically try to connect downtown and Shriner? So we're calling this the University District. the name is open for discussion. That was just kind of the easiest thing to describe it as we were talking about it internally. This is also an area where right now it is zoned for the entertainment mixed-use zoning district, which is somewhat of a limiting zoning district. And there's been some feedback over the years to the city that the economics just don't really pencil out all the time for those entertainment mixed-use developments or type projects in this area. And so we've had some conversations about how do we expand the potential uses that could go in this area beyond kind of that typical entertainment mixed use, and then how do we also get that some of those program uses that Shriner could kind of be involved in. So hence the university district. So the idea here is really creating a diverse district, lots of different land uses, could have a mix of housing, some of those entertainment uses such as food and bev, commercial and retail spaces. They're probably not going to be, you know, maybe the wine bars or the boutique retail that you see in the core. So maybe they're a little bit more affordable spaces for some like smaller restaurants that don't quite have the budget to be in the downtown core but still want to be part of that experience. Same with some of the retail. Maybe it's not, maybe it's a little bit more affordable retail space for uses that are still kind of benefit from being near downtown, but they're not necessarily downtown core businesses. Some of that could also include what we're calling innovation uses. So that's really light industrial, it's flex industrial, it's R&D, artist and maker studio. So maybe the gallery is in the core, but the art studio might be in this more affordable space down in the university district. There could be, again, those variety of residential projects, including multifamily, hospitality, and incubator spaces. So that was something we actually heard directly from Shriner, is that they're looking at the need for some incubator spaces for small businesses coming out of their students. And so that would be a really great place to put those that get, you know, obviously has the kind of energy from being close to the university, but also still draws on that downtown activity.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Have you ever considered bringing a football stadium?
So Shriner is building a football stadium.
Because I think the Shriner's gonna have
They're-
a football team. So
Yeah, they're building a
is this
stadium.
something you're considering?
Yeah, so they're gonna utilize Antler Stadium, but then Shriner is looking at building a stadium in the near future.
Because you need areas where you can
Yeah.
develop a football stadium,
Mm-hmm.
even a coliseum for, you can have a basketball.
Mhm.
basketball.
Yeah, and
Because those, but I don't know if you have the space, you know, and then you have
yes,
to-
in our conversations with Shriner, we talked about, they were talking about their plans for their football team and an eventual building of a stadium. They were pretty confident that they have physically the land on their campus right now that they need to build all of those things. So, because we asked them about that, we said, you know, do you see yourself needing to expand outside the boundaries of your campus so that we can plan ahead for those kind of things? And they were pretty confident that they would be willing to, all of their expansion plans could be housed within their land right now.
Orderly space just for the parking lot.
Yeah, well, they own some land that's not like on the main campus either. They own some land, I think, north of there. So they said, we're good. We don't need any more land right now. So those are the conversations that we had with them. So, yeah, yeah. All right. So then, so those were the character areas. So then in our process, we say, all right, those are kind of the character areas. Let's start adding some actual physical elements on top of these character areas. So first we start out with identifying potential open spaces.
Bill Blackburn.
So you'll see there in the kind of the light orange, that is the core. That's the downtown core that we had identified in the character areas. So we looked at how to balance this idea of some urban spaces that could host events and things like that versus this idea of natural spaces. So the darker green, kind of teal color, that's the possibility for some more urban kind of built up open spaces. So those might be like more plaza type parks and open spaces. And then, of course, you'll see the lighter green is areas where you could do some more natural kind of conservation along the river, connect the river trails. And we know there's a proposal for a boardwalk. There's an existing proposal for a boardwalk that kind of connects the river trail space there through downtown. Some supporting that and saying that is a good idea. That should happen as part of the downtown plan. And obviously some of these places are already existing. Blue East Hayes Park is on there. That's an existing open space, of course. So the urban spaces that we've identified here, down on the lower right-hand side, that is a major area that's around the fire station is there right now. So that is an opportunity. We're not saying the fire station would move, but we were saying the blocks around it could be reutilized as more of a public space. There's not a lot of room in the downtown core to make like a big public plaza type space that could host, events and things like that. So down here, we identified that block as a place where that could exist, and we actually really liked that location in terms of making that connection and kind of that nexus from the university district through the transition zone up to the downtown core. Now, within the core itself, we know the Entertainmart site is potentially redeveloping here soon, and so it would be really great if that redevelopment concept could incorporate a good downtown public open space, as well as reviving some conversations with the county courthouse and saying, hey, you are such a big presence here in downtown. What could we be doing better here to kind of add some value for the everyday downtown user on that site? And then, of course, there's some open space there in front of City Hall that's kind of already a public plaza, but how do we really incorporate that into this wider network of open spaces and make that kind of a more active, utilized open space, not just, yeah, it's there and it's pretty and it looks nice, but like, how are we actually utilizing it for something of value for downtown?
Isn't Frost Bank going into where Entertainment is?
It is on the
Isn't that-
corner,
Oh, okay. I
but
didn't
it's
know how
not
much
taking
we-
up like the whole thing.
Okay.
There's still a lot of area for development outside. Yeah, so that doesn't prohibit.
No, I didn't
like,
know
the
how much
rest.
it was taking, so that's
Yeah,
what I was
it's just like
curious
the
about.
corner. I don't know if Drew can add more.
Thank you.
Like a mirror
But-
of the one next, across the street. Almost.
Yeah, so there's still a lot of opportunity there outside the Frost Bank.
Well, curiosity question, is
Yeah.
anybody talking to the Frost Bank and about what their plans are, what we can do to get them to do something special?
Are you talking to Frost Bank, Drew?
I'm trying.
Yeah.
No, are you succeeding?
No.
I'm afraid of that.
How about you,
Mhm.
Bruce?
I'm not talking to Frost Bank.
Okay.
I talked to their marketing president or something, but he has nothing to do with like that side of it. He's just showing face and making nice.
Yeah.
Right.
See, that's one of the hazards I see in this great plan, is you got a fantastic opportunity there that we got no control over.
Yes, that will be part of the discussion, like when we get to implementation. That's always the crux of any of these plans we do is like, okay, cool, but what? Like how?
How do we make
right?
it owner?
Yeah, and I'll actually give you guys a really good example from a recent downtown plan that we just did for the city of Brownwood. There was a similar situation. So there was a bank, and then there was a bank-owned, just kind of like empty lot next to them. And as part of our downtown plan, we identified that as a good spot for an art park. That was an idea they had. They wanted an art park. So we put it in the plan. We did this really pretty rendering about this like awesome art park. And it was all at that point theoretical because they had no control over that land. But they took that then, they had this idea down on paper. It was formally adopted by city council. And they were able to take that to the bank owner and say, what do you guys think about this? Like, how could we make this happen? And the bank actually ended up donating that piece of property to the city and they're now building their art park. So, that's kind of the value of these. It is somewhat theoretical, but having things down on paper and saying the community, the city council, we agree that this is what we want, it gives you ammunition to then go have those conversations. rather than just being like, hey, I'm random person from whatever, I think you should put a park on your land, versus like it being an adopted, city council adopted plan. So, again,
What you mentioned is actually lies with the planning department, the city planning department, because there's properties for sale. The city doesn't have a planning, like you have over here planning, so they can acquire this, for sale properties to start building. So
that can be another
The city planning
outcome.
department doesn't have a vision.
Right, and that's exactly what this is. This is meant to be that vision that gives, you know, kind of gives the roadmap for the conversations for possibly purchasing land that, you know, aligns with this vision, that kind of thing. That is kind of the power of these plans. Yeah. And then you'll also see on here, there's some green arrows pointing down onto the river. So those are potential access points where, you know, looking at like the land ownership and the right of ways in those areas, that those could be points where you could extend the road, or not the road itself, but the pedestrian connectivity from that road alignment down to the river trail. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like 6 points. And some of those are already existing. So the topmost one, you know, that's where the library is, that already has that access point. But you could have additional ones. All right, then we start overlaying our open space framework with a mobility framework. There's a lot of lines on here, but mobility is very important. So again, we'll have these available. And I think those of you on the dais, you have a printout that hopefully is a little easier for you to see. So some of the things we've thought about for mobility is the 2 black lines you see, Sydney Baker and Broadway. So those are our 2 tech stock corridors. Those are going to be your heavily trafficked vehicular corridors. What we try to do is minimize pedestrian conflicts with those major corridors. We don't want to be putting cars and people and bikes all on the same spaces. It's not to say they won't have basic sidewalks, but that's not where you're going to encourage people to be, where all the vehicles are. So thinking about that, the purple lines, which I recognize are a little hard to distinguish. I recognize that at this scale. So the purple are along Water Street. What's the one north of Broadway? Jefferson? Jefferson, yeah. So Water Street and Jefferson, and then Earl, Garrett, and Clay, I believe.
Right.
So the intent here with the purple lines are where what we're calling the primary multimodal routes. So that's where we're seeing where we do want to funnel the most amount of pedestrians. And the intent here was to connect the core with a nice, good, solid square of these primary multimodal routes, and then using some of those other routes that go then to destinations kind of outside the core, so Water and Jefferson, connecting down to Shriner, also connecting even further west to our other small area plan that we're looking at Nimitz. So that's where we put the most investment into sidewalks, bike lanes, shared use paths, things like that, to really get that multimodal connectivity going throughout the downtown, but then also to points outside of downtown, and then across the river to both Louise Hayes Park and this potential redevelopment of the mall. Again, even though it's outside of downtown, if that is truly a major redevelopment, it's going to have a big impact on downtown. And then everything else in the tealish color, and that's why there's so many lines on here. So those are what we would consider the secondary pedestrian routes, and those are the ones that are going to make sure we get sidewalks in them, but maybe there's not as much bike infrastructure, things like that. There's so many lines on here because in a downtown, you basically want that on every street in your downtown. You want at least basic pedestrian infrastructure everywhere. You will notice, so especially up in like that northern area where the HEB is, there are lines that go through existing buildings. This is a plan that's looking out to the year 2050. So with that, we think about, yes, right now, there is an HEB there, and we have drawn a dashed line through the existing HEB. However, the intent of this is to say, if the HEB is to go away at some point, they're doing this in a lot of places, right? They're rebuilding and taking down, and we know this one's a newer one, so that's not going to be anytime soon, but again, we're looking 25 years out, at which point that there is a consideration for taking down some of those existing buildings and building something else or building something new, reconnecting the grid in that area would be a really good idea. Not having those dead-end roads, making it that fully connected grid of streets back in there. So,
And Caitlin, the committee's probably noticed that's the old HEB
yeah.
footprint, so kind of going back to our earlier discussion.
Yeah, I think the HEB is now
Yeah, where's the line
here.
currently? I mean,
The
it wouldn't
HEB is like right
necessarily
here now.
have to go away, maybe
But-
it doesn't need as much parking because people are doing shared rides or air taxis or something by 2050, so maybe we
Yeah,
can
who knows?
reconnect the street network in front of HEB.
Yeah, so that's the idea here. So we don't, want people to be like, are you guys dumb? There's a building there. You can't put a road there. No, it is intentional. It is, the idea there is that we're not saying this building should be demolished, but if it is to be taken down or reconfigured at some point in the next 25 years, we want to have it noted officially that we would like to reconnect that street grid if possible, if that opportunity comes up. Then the last thing for mobility you'll see, well, actually not the last thing, but what you'll see is in the red, the little red kind of glowy areas, that is where some of our primary multimodal routes cross those TxDOT right-of-ways. And so that is where we want to put a little bit more thought into crosswalks, safety, maybe we bring in some like innovative pedestrian crosswalk type of things. I say that with a grain of salt, going back to your question about how much power do we actually have to make these things happen? It'll all depend on TxDOT. But again, having these in the plan gives the city something to take to TxDOT and say, here's what we're thinking, come be a partner with us in making this happen.
And that's your parking garage problem.
Yeah, the crossing. Yes. So those would be kind of the 6 areas where we would really focus on additional intersection enhancements. Maybe it's a partnership between the city and TxDOT in terms of paying for something, but those are the places we've noticed that would really create those conflicts. So I did want to just stop and note a little bit about when we're talking about mobility and we're talking about walkability. So when we talk about walkability, there's really 4 things that have been studied that, for example, if you ask someone, how long did you walk? And maybe it's the same distance, but someone says, oh, that took me 15 minutes, or oh, that took me 5. It's that perception of how long was this walk. So perception is a really big thing in walkability. If someone perceives it as an unpleasant walk, they won't do it even if it's 1 block. But if it's a pleasant walk, they might walk 10 blocks because it's nice. So when we talk about a pleasant walkable experience, these are kind of the 4 things we talk about. We talk about comfort. Is it clean? Is it shaded, especially here in Texas? Does it look nice? Are the materials nice materials? Is the walkway flat? Am I tripping over things? Safety, so in terms of, do I feel safe from vehicles or do I feel like I'm gonna get hit while I'm walking down this road? Lighting, and then just the general public safety elements. Is it interesting? And that's actually a really big one. That's not really as much of a physical public realm, but are the buildings that I'm walking along, are they active frontages? Are there interesting things happening? Or is it just a brick wall that I'm walking along for blocks and blocks and blocks? Public art, other people. Is it active? Can I kind of people watch as I walk along, or am I totally alone and it's just boring and bleak? And then purposeful in terms of destinations, like, do I have places to walk to? Why am I walking? So if you get those 4 things right in a downtown, then that's what will create kind of that pleasant walkable experience for pedestrians. And the last piece here, again, we heard this idea of alley activation. You actually don't have that many alleys in like your downtown core area. But what we did identify is down here in this like future university district, there's this very long alley that goes all the way from that block that we identified for possibly a future public plaza all the way down to almost to Shriner. It's about 6 or 7 blocks long. This could be a really, really interesting spot to do an alley activation. This is a picture from Denver, where I'm originally from, that I think is a really good alley activation, where they allow the businesses from the inside of the building to front onto the alley as well, and they put lights and they put planters and they put building business frontages back there as well. So they're kind of dual fronting businesses that front both the road and the alley behind. And it just creates this really interesting experience, something a little bit different. The downtown core experience is one thing, and then this is something different. So it's just something a little unique that, again, kind of pulls that experience, not just from the downtown core, but kind of pulls it south into something a little bit unique. Also, it provides that alternate pedestrian route. So if someone doesn't want to walk along Broadway or Water in this area, you can walk through the alley. So this is the spot we've really identified as that potential alley activation that we heard about from the community, was interested in.
That's an excellent idea, the alley activation, actually. I have behind me, they have a trash can that can be activated for public use, and move those trash cans somewhere the city can say, well, here's gonna be your trash, and just planning department.
Exactly. Yeah, that's
Planning
part of the
department
implementation
that
thing,
needs
is then
to
what do you
work.
do with the
They need
functional
to work
pieces of
with
the
planning
alley?
department.
But yeah, absolutely. And alley activations are pretty low investment in terms of money compared to a lot of other things. They don't have to be big, hard, expensive things. They can be pretty kind of like organic things that just happen. Like this you see here in this image, I mean, it's festoon lighting and it's movable planters. Like it's not big, high dollar elements necessarily.
And just because that 7 blocks has been, identified as a good opportunity, that doesn't mean the whole 7 blocks has to be activated to be considered successful. Start at the north end where you have an interesting angle there at A Street, going towards the fire station, and start with kind of a 2-block alley activation, and maybe that extends south, over time. It doesn't have to be all or nothing, which is sometimes where plans fail.
That's a good point, yeah. All right, so then this last slide here. So this last slide, the overall framework, this is just a conglomeration of all the things we just talked about. So this is what we end up having as our downtown framework plan. So it's the open spaces, it's the catalyst development sites, it's the mobility framework, and all of those things come together to kind of create this general framework plan for the public realm in downtown. And then we start talking about, okay, what are the details? What are some of these logistical issues? What are the infrastructure implications? How do we actually get this done? That's kind of the next step. Is if this feels good to folks, then we can kind of carry on to that implementation piece. So with that is what we had to present today. We'll go into discussion and additional Q&A here in a minute, but I will note some of our next steps. So like I said, if the framework feels good, with maybe if we go back and do a few tweaks, but then we start getting into the details of actually some of that detailed street design, the infrastructure, branding and activation. So that's like gateways, signage, wayfinding, things like that, and the implementation action plan. We are targeting to have a plan draft in late February or early March. That includes the downtown plan, but also the other 2 pieces, the comprehensive plan and the Nimitz Lake. So kind of a full draft of everything basically in the next 4 to 6 weeks. We'll have another committee meeting in March here. Once we get that kind of draft plan together, the committee will have a chance to look at it, and then we'll talk about it again. And then, like I said, we're looking at approvals in June. Our website is still up and running, kerrville2050.com. We do still have that pin map open, like I mentioned, but that's also where we post the draft chapters and the presentations and all of that stuff.
At some point, will you have a up-to-date map that you're overlaying this on?
Too.
Yeah, well, we're gonna
That'd be
try.
kind of incumbent upon us understanding some of the
Yeah, so in
details
terms of the
this.
building footprints, so that depends on if that data is available.
So it's not on Aegis?
What?
It's not on Aegis? It's not on the I know you could go and download maps.
Yeah, so that's what we got this from the county's GIS data.
GIS.
I just looked, and it does look to be relatively updated, so I'm gonna ask our person that does our maps to update that base layer if possible.
Yeah, which
So
should be
it's-
possible. If the data's out there, it should be possible.
Yeah.
We're not going to go in and recreate
No.
and like draw. That's not part of our scope. But yeah, and we should be able to. Okay, perfect. Yeah, so we'll get some updated data on this. Yes, ma'am.
After the approvals, when is it supposed to groundbreak?
Well, then that will be up to the city then is, based on the implementation plan, part of that action plan will be prioritization. So, you know, we usually say, what should you be doing in the next 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? So then that would be up to the city to start taking some of those near-term elements and figuring out how to get them going. So that's just the next question. Yeah.
When are you finishing your plan
On this project?
Yeah.
So June,
this year?
June of 2025, yeah.
Excellent.
What about our committee members? Any questions, comments from you guys?
To the whole big thing?
To everything that I just talked about, anything or everything I just talked about, what are your thoughts? Are we on the right track? If we move forward with these ideas, are you gonna be happy?
I'll make an observation. I
Yeah.
think you're on the right track, and I think that the community input has been good, and I don't see a single thing here that I would find objectionable, and many exciting ideas.
Okay.
But there's something I don't sense, and I think the gentleman who talked about the Frost Bank, it's a sense of urgency, because we're talking about 2050, and we realize that a lot of these things take a long time to get there, but some things are right in our face, and I think that being relatively new to Kerrville, but choosing to live here, there are many very unique and pleasant advantages to this town. I've seen a multitude of places around the country that had that and lost it. And it's like when you bring up the Frost Bank and then our response is, well, we don't have any control over that. We could have a loss right there. It's a small one, but it's a bite, and a bite here and a bite there. So that bothers me a little bit. I think there needs to be, in the action plan, a sense of urgency and more incremental, with some very significant focus on certain issues. And then I will say that even though it's not an economic plan, which I certainly understand, in a sense it really is, though, quality of life does result in economic activity, enhancement, and so forth, if done properly. And then one observation I want to make on behalf of the downtown group, it's very interesting when you mentioned the parking garage, and talked about it as an asset, and I saw several heads go like that, and I saw several heads go like that. And it is a mixed bag, but underlying that, to me, the real issue is if we're trying to create what I think most communities really are seeking, whether they call it that or not, is a pedestrian-friendly environment. That means a place where you want to be, with your neighbors, engaging. You've got to deal with the automobile, and that does not mean massive parking lots everywhere. That just destroys a community. But we do have an issue right now. Our downtown, currently, there's almost no properties without contracts or being used productively. And we've had a little bump in parking recently that's unfortunate. We've lost some spaces that are significant. And the parking garage, although it's unique and it's wonderful, and if you live in New York City and you had one like that, you'd be thrilled. But most people have a discomfort with parking garages. Ours, we know you can't find the doggone thing because you don't know it's there. And that's something that can be resolved, I know, but it is an asset that's there that does require some, I think most of the people with the downtown group, or rather Main Street, agree, urgency. We're not all about the automobile, but we know that that needs to be one of those things right up at the top of this issue. And I do like the way that this integrates the community. I think the university is a treasure. I think it's a great university because it has a beer garden, and it's right at the head of a trail that leads downtown. So I don't know which direction, is most productive, but, so I think that kind of linkage is critical. And one final comment, it's kind of unfortunate, but it's there, and we really have to think about it, is right downtown are two major state highways, and they're becoming busier and busier. And I cannot believe that in a little town of Kerrville, I've seen gridlock and been caught at it. And what does that mean? And invariably, state highway departments don't think the way communities do. They think about speed and moving traffic, and so in those two corridors, I'll add this final thought that is lovely as Kerrville is, I think they're pretty ugly corridors, and they really do need to be addressed in terms of aesthetics, as well as, the overall functioning of the community. So there, I've said everything I planned to say. I'm going home. Goodbye. Thank you.
Sounds good.
I think you've come up with some great ideas. I find a little bit of a broad brush. I'd like to see you suggest some tools for us to use to accomplish some of these things. Downtown housing, incubators, stores, incubator space, some tools that we might find. I do have one comment on the, I think the downtown core looks good, but I would like to see you extend that up Earl Garrett Street where you have the blue supporting development. That area up Earl Garrett really functions like a part of the downtown core. And there are some businesses that have been established up there, and it's a great walking area for downtown. So I'd like to see that the downtown core extend up Earl Garrett, because there's a lot that's been done with those houses, those historic buildings, and some very good businesses, profitable businesses, have moved there. So that's all I have to say.
I love this. I think I'm still kind of digesting all the information. I think that I don't really have anything to add at the moment, but I like it. It's very inspiring. I'm really excited to be a part of it. Hopefully we can. I feel like maybe as we move forward, some of the stuff will kind of become a little more concrete, because it does seem a little abstract. Like we're still talking just concepts right now.
Yes, it's high level right now. The next step is the details.
Yes,
So
yes.
we want to make sure the concept is good before we put all the details to it, or else it's wasted.
No,
But yeah.
all good. I don't have any.
Okay. One of you guys know Main Street.
I love it. The alley activation for me is something that I've wanted to see happen for quite some time. I used to own a business down at the end of what we would call University, the University District. I feel like any way to connect that end of town, or to make it something that's more desirable for people that are downtown to move in that direction, or vice versa, is wonderful. My thoughts on the parking garage. I love our parking garage. I love that we have it. I have always imagined that if we were to develop more around the parking garage, if there was more for people to do that wasn't a bank or a gas station or a bank or a gas station, that maybe that people, like, it would be more of centrally located to what would be, walkability. So I love it, though. I think this is a great plan.
I think this is a phenomenal job. Obviously lots of work, but great detail. I like the idea around the public space around the firehouse. It brings the community together around a needed department that citizens utilize, and you can raise your young child, and they get to every little boy loves a fire truck, right? So that's great. Can you speak to how y'all take into account the demographics of Kerrville? in terms of walkability. Because the reality is we have an elderly community, and they just don't walk. Yes, the parking garage is there. They don't walk. They don't want to get in the parking garage and walk across the street. There is the safety factor, and we've witnessed multiple businesses just go out of business because people aren't going to walk across the street. So how can you speak to just the reality of our demographics?
Yeah, so part of that is, still maintaining those on-street parking spots that are, right there in front of the businesses. If you can get more people to park in the garage, that maybe opens up some of those on-street parking for people that need it. Some of it's also that idea, kind of, I guess it's farther down, but like that walkability quadrants thing that I showed. So that safety piece, the materiality is always a big one. So we kind of look at like ADA accessibility. If it's ADA accessible, it's more accessible for everyone, whether you're actually needing ADA accessibility compliance or not. So, you talk about, are the sidewalks kind of wide enough? Are they flat enough? Is the pavement in good quality? Are there a bunch of obstructions? Are you keeping that walkable kind of open space on the sidewalk so people aren't having to, shimmy around furniture and cafe seating tables and things? And then part of that is also like strollers. So we get that, like, a lot of ADA accessibility is actually really good for strollers as well. And then part of it's also like areas of seating and shade. So an older person might want to sit in the shade on part of their walk, right? So they're not having to walk 5 blocks all at once in the blaring heat. It's like there's spots for them to sit in a shady spot and have a moment of rest before they continue the rest of the journey. So those are kind of all some of the strategies that we use just to make a more pedestrian-friendly environment. But again, especially if you focus on kind of that ADA accessibility, then it'll just be better for everybody. Those are some of the things we think about. If there's other things we need to be thinking about, I'd love to hear those as well.
Caitlin,
yeah, good.
So you did a good job kind of covering the kind of technical limitations.
Yeah.
Since you asked about demographics,
sure.
Part of that is getting more young people into downtown, giving them more reasons to come to downtown. And we mentioned housing, providing more places, for younger folks to live when they get out of college. Maybe they're graduating from Schreiner, or they're sticking around in Kerrville. They're not ready to buy a big house yet, so they have an opportunity to locate close to downtown. That becomes their neighborhood. So it becomes activated like any neighborhood would. And that tends to have a ripple effect where you see more people walking around downtown. So even if you're an elderly person or you're kind of sensory limited in terms of sight or hearing, there's a higher level of comfort knowing that more people are around. So if you kind of get stuck or have trouble navigating, there's people and you can ask for help. So part of it is kind of psychological and getting more people into downtown. And be careful about how I say this because I don't want to suggest that Kerrville should turn into Fredericksburg, but giving more folks from outside of the city and the county, reasons to come to downtown. Kerrville brings in a lot of people, for recreation around the river, RV parks and things like that. But the downtown has more potential to be kind of a draw with restaurants and things to do. So we want to build on that so that also is having a multiplier effect with the housing and with the broader demographics, all utilizing downtown and giving it kind of that neighborhood feel.
As you talk about these things, there's talk about mobility and what I'm sort of seeing the elephant in the room. Are you going to be talking about our sidewalks and what we can do downtown to make them better?
Yes. Yeah, that'll be part of those implementation recommendations will be, okay, we decided this framework plan is what we want. So what does that actually mean? What are the actions that the city then takes to realize that? Yeah. Yep. Yes, ma'am.
So I have a question. I do apologize for being late. I ran over, but
You know, we have a lot of elderly that come
Mhm.
into the salon, and it's not really feasible for them to park at the garage. They have
Sure.
a hard time parking like 3 spaces over.
Right.
And then they're not allowed to park at Shriner
Mm-hmm.
Building. And of course, now we lost the other parking lot at Charles. It's just the garage. Is there, maybe I missed something? Are y'all considering doing extra parking, I guess, around like the River's Edge Art Gallery? I'm right next door.
Okay.
So that would be the corner of Washington and Water Street.
Yeah. I mean, I think that is somewhat of a question that we have for the group is, you know, there are pros and cons to more parking. You know, we mentioned some of the cons that it's a parking lot is not one of those uses that creates a nice walkable experience. But we also understand the need for parking. So where, I guess, what do you guys want? Do you want more parking, or do you want to try to find other creative ways? You know, maybe there's a little shuttle from the parking garage or something that people can like hop on, hop off, just one of those like little extended golf carts that sits like 6 people and can shuttle people from the garage to the other side of Sydney Baker, something like that. So there's some creative.
I think there are some things, I mean, I just know, I manage River's Edge, and behind, there's a massive parking space, which also that alleyway, I knew that exactly what you were talking about, because there are those buildings that their backs are on Earl Garrett, right? Or if they face Earl Garrett, their backs are at that same parking lot.
Yeah.
That whole component is utterly underutilized.
Yeah. So maybe it's just, maybe it's just
Yeah.
better utilization of what's there.
Well, I mean, just cleaning it up.
Yeah, cleaning it up, maybe
Yeah.
getting, you know, shared parking agreements.
Well, the city is not gonna clean, so, I mean.
Well, even the public sidewalks are the
Yeah.
grass isn't taken down. That is a city
Maintenance
obligation.
some maintenance recommendations
Yeah.
will definitely be part of the implementation plan. And I think, looking at kind of where, it would be interesting, Drew, do you guys have like parking utilization studies or anything for downtown? That'd be really interesting.
No, we don't. The main parking lot they're talking about is owned by Windstream?
Windstream.
Yeah, Windstream.
Static.
So it is private parking lot. But no, we don't have any full parking studies.
Yeah, so maybe that's a recommendation that comes out of this plan, is you need to do an actual like parking utilization study where someone goes out different times of day, different days of the week, and says, what are the parking lots, what are the public parking spots, where are the private parking spots, when are they or are not utilized? And then that sets the stage for things like shared parking agreements, that the city can kind of be the broker of, hey, like oftentimes a church, for example, or even a bank, you know, a church that is only really fully utilized a few times a week can be a really good opportunity for shared parking agreements. Even a bank that's open like 8 to 5, but maybe it's not open at evenings and weekends when some of the other like retail and restaurant uses are busiest. So you can start thinking about those kind of things, is how much private parking is there really, and does it, like, can you democratize that a little bit and share some extra parking that, is there actually enough spaces?
There's a whole parking lot that you can't park in during the day.
Right,
That's not being
so
used.
those kinds of things, like,
Yeah.
Actually,
can there
there's
be a
more than
program,
one. I
a
think
shared
it's on
parking
either side of the
program?
Shriner
Who
building
brokers that in the city?
I mean, it could be like a city. The city kind of could be the broker of that. It could be like a downtown district or economic development group of some kind. Someone with a little bit like umbrella power, a little bit, to bring those stakeholders to the table.
Like Main Street?
Yeah, so the Main Street program, which is a part of the city, but yeah.
Development Services.
Hey, oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I thought I saw a hand in
Okay.
the corner of my head, but.
Now I'm talking about the big plan, not
Sure.
just downtown, but, you know, you talked about threats.
Uh-huh.
And I guess my brainer is always thinking way out there, you know, what are the other things coming at us? And there's an enormous property that I think is pretty close to the core of the city that could impact downtown or the whole town. And I don't think any of us know much about it other than what we've read in the paper, and that's the Tybee Commons, where the high school used to be. And I don't know how many acres that is, but that is just a massive, massive area. It's almost like you could create a whole new downtown. Does anybody know how much acreage?
25.
25 acres? And that's a lot, right on the main highway. And has that come up at all? And
It has come up, and we don't know a lot of details either. We just know it's there and it's an opportunity for redevelopment. It's being looked at for
well, that brings
redevelopment.
me to another point then. We don't know a lot of details. And back to this gentleman's observation about the bank. I think we're flying blind in a lot of ways, and I certainly don't blame the city. I really admire our city staff and planning department because they've got their hands full and they've done amazing things. But we need to help them, and we need to not be flying blind about these things because for all the things we're talking about, one wrong move in certain areas could upset the apple cart totally.
Yeah.
And so I think there's got to be some criteria where developers have more sharing of their vision and how it interfaces, and thus having more input.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of that is kind of state law things, which is, what do developers have to share and what they don't have to share. So yeah, I mean, we would love if like a developer would share their whole pro forma, right? But that's not,
But community pressure can make a big difference.
Sure.
Independent laws.
So, I mean, a lot of that comes down to, some of the public bodies, the P&Z or the city council and what their negotiations with developers are. But yeah, you're right. I mean, we do these plans to the best of our ability with the available knowledge. And we recognize we often don't know everything. And some things, the day after we adopt this plan, something's gonna pop up the next day that renders some piece of it maybe obsolete. But that is the world we work in on a daily basis. I mean, we just kind of do the best we can, and but there are gonna be pieces that do or don't come to fruition because of things we didn't know or that we can't even predict, right, in the next 25 years that we don't know.
I can say for that Tybee Commons area, that one of the property owner or part owners of it was at our first community event and workshop, and a few of us spoke to him, and they are looking at ways to redevelop the site. I think his biggest interest was maybe like a mixed use type development, but they have some issues with some of the utility services, and so that's the biggest hurdle that they're running into right now before they can really take off. I think it's expensive I think they have to maybe extend sewer. And so that's like their current hurdle before they can really like try to do anything else. And so I know they have communicated with the city before and are working through some of that, but that one specifically, we did kind of talk to them a little bit about it, and they want to do something that would benefit the community as well. So I think the city does have contact with them at least, so there could be a little more just confirmation and what we've proposed. I think the land use and the future land use map should align with the vision that we heard, at least from that first discussion.
I think it's great to keep up a dialogue. I have a feeling there may be a change of ownership eventually.
And those kind of things that we may or may not know about.
And a very different view of what.
Well, that's always very possible.
I think that's outside of our downtown area.
It is, yeah.
That's the broad, for sure.
Well, it is and it isn't, from my viewpoint, that things that happen out there could, imagine if it were a very intense business, like a shopping mall or something like that. That could
Or
really,
Whiskey Springs.
which is right down the road.
60 acres at the interstate.
Yeah. 600 acres.
Well, 60 acres commercial.
Wow.
But this is all within the tiers we're discussing.
Yeah, we're supposed to just be talking about inside.
Sorry.
I mean, but that's okay. We'll take those kind of comments too. We're working on all of it. Yes, sir.
I was going to refer the lady's comment about senior citizens.
Uh-huh.
In your proposal, are you recommending building townhomes? Like, for example, in Houston, they have Uptown. That is full of condominiums. There's shopping around. They have to tear down all those high-priced George Bush residential homes to build this. Now, are you proposing something similar over here? Because we have a big, large senior citizens in this town, where they can go to the mall, they don't have to park, they can walk and have their condominiums, maybe their porter take their things up to their rooms, whatever.
Yeah.
Are we Get it?
Yes.
The reason I'm saying this, because we don't wanna be like, highway department, they add 2 holes, then 10 years later, they wanna have 4 now, and they have to knock some more. And
Yeah.
it costs a lot. And your proposal, is this something
Yeah, and
that you proposing,
Yeah, and-
or you are limited to whatever?
no, I mean, at this point, so, I mean, we're not proposing specific, like, projects, like, you should put a townhome project on this lot or a multifamily project on this lot. But what we are proposing as part of these character areas, we have, like, recommended uses. So in some of these, you'll definitely see, like in the supporting development, anticipated uses of live-work units, a variety of residential products, and we talk about like missing middle housing, so that would be the duplexes, the quadplexes, townhomes, things like that. So we're not necessarily saying specifically what kind of things should go where, but we're kind of broadly saying those things should be allowed to go here. If there is a developer who can make it pencil, or a single person who just wants to go in and like build a duplex on a lot, in that supporting development area, they should be allowed to do that and encouraged to do things like that.
Do you know there's already a developer working with the city from Miami, doing some kind of project? Can you recommend maybe you can put a condominium?
Yeah, well, I mean, again, like, we won't get into like specifically like, hey, your lot should be X, Y, Z, because that's not how the market works. But like, so for example, like in the transition zone in the university district, we do talk about up to 5 stories, residential projects, including multifamily, so that would be condos and apartments. So we do call for and even encourage that kind of development in some of these character areas.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Do you consider sightlines?
To the
Yes.
river, because
Some.
the one Shriner building is like a massive edifice to blocking the river. And not that I'm saying anything bad about them, it was done long ago. I'm just, when you talk about infill and apartments, I think
Yeah.
that river is gold.
Yeah.
It's just gold. And so I come from that hated land on the West Coast, and one of the things that is really key is those sight lines. That even if you are infilling, you have a way of seeing the ocean or the bay, or in this case, the river.
Yeah. Yeah, and on this part, because of how like the land kind of is, I mean, in the transition zone, we definitely talk about that, especially there's a few like empty lots you can see down like right on the river. That's one of the reasons we put a little bit higher scale down in these, in the transition zone in the university district, is understanding that there could be some real value to some of those riverfront lots. And allowing for a little bit higher density there to take advantage of that value, make things pencil a little easier, by being able to do something a little bigger. I will also say this is not part of the downtown, but in our Nimitz Lake plan, we're also talking about that in terms of putting some like medium density mixed use along the north side of Junction Highway, and then lower scale kind of uses right along the river, so then you can kind of, even though they're not right on the river, they can still have that view value. So we have been talking about it some, but if there's more that we should know about it, let us know. We would love to, if there's additional connections.
They should redevelop the golf course and put a shopping mall on there.
There are a couple of opportunities.
It'll happen
Properties,
someday.
like I think just off screen is the property that the state owns that has a large parking lot, and there's kind of multiple tiers of ways to access and see the river. One from is like a plaza type setting where you have direct access from the street, but there's also the elevated view where maybe you have like a rooftop deck or restaurant or something like that that's incorporated into a hotel, and that just kind of becomes a nice focal point looking out over the river. So I think mixing in policy like that, so that when businesses do come along, the city kind of has something to focus that energy on, will achieve that goal of opening things up to the river. Because the river is great once you get down kind of close to the water. It'll be even better with the boardwalk, but now we're trying to bridge that gap
That visual.
with Water Street. Yeah.
We haven't talked any about, use of a pedestrian mall downtown. Is that part of the plan, or have you thought about that?
Like closing down a street to turn into a
Yeah.
pedestrian mall. We have not talked about that much yet. So if there is a conversation we need to be having, now's the time. Is there a desire for closing a street down?
You know, there was also, you brought up at one time, say, closing Earl Garrett every Saturday, every
So it's
weekend.
temporary.
Temporarily.
Mhm.
So, you know, are those part of the things that we'll get to later on, or is this,
I mean, if there is a want to have a conversation about like actually closing a street down and creating a pedestrian mall, we should have that today. If it's more of just a temporary closure and it's more of a logistical kind of management thing, then yeah, that can come in as part of the implementation plan.
I think that there are several steps that need to be taken before we would close down, say, Earl Garrett Street.
Sure.
You've got to figure out what you're going to do with people who are currently parking there.
Sure.
And so we would need some place like the Windstream parking lot to move those people to. But cities that I have seen where they have a pedestrian mall, that becomes the premier shopping area for the entire town.
Sure.
It becomes the highest property
Value.
values. So it seems to have been successful in a lot of communities.
So would you be interested in seeing maybe a recommendation as part of this plan that is along the lines of a temporary closure pilot program? And then if that goes really well, you can kind of revisit something bigger, but you could do like a temporary only on certain days and hours. You know, it's something, it's not as much of a commitment.
Yep.
And then you can kind of test it and see.
I think my only fear is that on one side of Earl Garrett is KACC, the Shriner Mansion, and Shriner Goods. That's it. They're not gonna go away. They're not gonna change. Those are not gonna become boutique shops that take people in and out and keep them hanging out. But obviously, we do have the small boutique shops on the other side.
But we also have, you know, some other interesting stores as well. And I've seen those pedestrian malls too, and I love them. They're so walkable, and there's so many things to see. I fear that we don't have the things to see, and where we don't have things to see isn't gonna change.
Would be my concern.
I don't know, the
Yeah, I
pedestrian
don't know.
mall might make them change.
Yeah, hold on.
I have a business on the east side of Earl Garrett, and the sidewalks are so narrow that we can't put tables or chairs or anything outside because the sidewalks and the lighting, the poles, everything kind of makes it a very difficult maneuver for anybody with a stroller or wheelchair.
Sure.
So I've thought for a very long time that it would be wonderful to do a temporary closure, not just on the weekends, but do like a trial where we close down half of the street, because there's a very wide sidewalk on that other side, on the west side. So on the east side, if we closed down one lane, made it a one-way street,
Yeah.
and then maybe just did a trial where we put some great big troughs with flowers to separate the businesses from the one-way and from each other, so that people could walk along through there and just kind of, you know, have businesses be able to put some tables and chairs and maybe expand their business in some way, even if they're not a
Yeah,
cafe.
I mean, the one-way conversion is an interesting conversation that we haven't
You
had
need to
yet.
show them your plan for one way on the Earl Garrett. You have a plan for that, remember?
Alright, hold on one second.
It's been a long time.
I was just gonna say, I live in San Marcos, and we have a very similar, type situation where they'll shut down this one portion, this one street, only for like a block on the square with the flower troughs, and, there really isn't much on that part, just the county courthouse. However, it's really the street vendors that take over. So if y'all wanna do those temporary, closures, I think having a Saturday farmer's market or something to really bring people out, let the vendors take over the street, that might kind of transform that area.
But I was thinking of something more like temporary for 3 or 6 months, just to see
Yeah.
how it feels for the community
Sure.
to lose those few spaces on that one side and just to expand the sidewalk so that there's more equal on both sides. And it will encourage, I think, a lot more pedestrian traffic.
Yeah.
I would actually expand on Sue's idea.
Yeah.
That you would take Water Street from Sidney Baker, and from Sidney Baker to Clay, it'd be one way away from the highway. And from Sidney Baker to Washington, it would be one way away from the highway. And Earl Garrett would be one way away from the highway, which would drive all the traffic to the intersection at Washington and Water Street, or Water Street and Clay Street. And then you can increase on-street parking because you just expanded the width of Water Street by a lane and increased the width of the sidewalks so that Sue can have a spot, Grape Juice can have a spot, El Posto can have a spot. There, you expand every restaurant on those two streets now just got street parking. When the last time that I was in Rome, at 4 o'clock, the restaurant started pulling the tables and chairs out into the street, and it was probably not an official thing, but I've had wonderful dinners just
Right.
sitting on a street, on the south side of the river, and you're on the pavement. But if we did that, if you think about it, anybody who sat at Francisco's, and the traffic going through Water Street, it's a through street where people are avoiding the signals off of the highway. And that's a mistake. All those diesel trucks and stuff, if you made those one way so that it broke that throughway of Water Street from 5 Points to Broadway, it would change downtown. And it would also incorporates the parking garage in better, while also adding more parking on the streets.
Okay, so is there anyone in the room who's like opposed to this one-way conversion thought?
I'm not opposed,
Stuart?
but I think we should consult
It's just a planning meeting.
a professional.
Yeah.
not speculate.
Yeah,
I
it's,
mean, I build refineries, shopping centers, but I'm not a professional
Yeah.
about traffic. So
Yeah.
I cannot advise anybody, even if I have this
Yeah.
great idea.
The traffic
But
engineering
I think we should
piece.
get professionals on that.
yeah,
Well,
but
these things are
generally,
all-
from a high level, everyone would be good with kind of considering this. Sometimes one-way conversions get thrown out, and there are people who are vehemently against even considering the idea. So I want to make sure everyone's even at least interested in
These are all temporary.
Yeah, that's
So
true.
we can try them, and
Yeah.
if they work, great. If they don't work, we haven't lost anything.
Bingo.
I have a question. I know that it's been talked about a million times, and for some reason it's escaping me, but the brokerage between the city and businesses for parking. Has anyone from the city spoken with Windstream lately about possibly, or have they ever, about utilizing that parking lot for downtown space? I know that I've heard it come up in meetings over the years, and I just, for the life of me, cannot remember where that landed.
I don't know that we have lately, but
I talk to Zachary Zinner over there occasionally, and that's their parking space.
We
That's theirs.
used to be able to rent
Okay.
spaces there. They used to rent spaces. I used to rent a space there
Okay.
years ago. It was like $25 a month. It was great. And that property's owned in a REIT, a real estate investment trust. And so the lawyers got involved and worried about getting sued. And so it's really difficult. And I don't know, they've never told me this. I've always thought the way that has to be done is you gotta replace it with something else for the REIT. The problem is, and Stuart, you correct me if I'm wrong, all of the main telephone communication trunk lines come into that building and next to that parking lot.
In the alleyway between the parking lot and the next
Yeah.
building, yes.
And that's why they have the generators back behind Mr. Mamani's building and Sue's building. And so that's never gonna move. That second story, all it is switches and
Right.
equipment and stuff. You can't do anything. Moving that would actually be ginormous, right?
So the opportunity to rent those spaces, or that's all gone?
We've tried to talk to them about redeveloping, and once I saw the second story, you can't do anything with it. There's no room. It's all full of equipment.
I spent a lot of time talking with Rusty about that parking lot. And really, Windstream only needs maybe 5 spaces to park their trucks. That's
Yeah.
their entire need.
That's it.
And if you can take away the liability and still allow them to park their 5 trucks, they're gonna be happy. That's really their requirements.
I guess that's what I'm asking is there an option for us to work with Windstream to be able to utilize some of that space, whether it's us renting it from, the city renting it from Windstream or purchasing that portion of the parking lot? I don't know what that looks like, but.
I think that an individual has zero chance of doing anything with Kinetic. I think the city has a great opportunity to work with Kinetic.
Yeah, we can certainly ask, but I mean, obviously, it's their property, so if they say no, we're still stuck having the same conversation.
How much is theirs? I know there's the bit on the alley, right, where they park their trucks, but then, there's a
The
lot
rest
of,
of that.
there's a big space back there.
Big vacant parking lot
That
that
whole
has
thing.
the bollards around it,
Mhm.
that's all owned by Windstream.
So if they say no,
Kinetic.
so they say no, right, they have the right to do that, but is there any is there any way we can be creative to incentivize them to like, talk about it?
Their incentivization system.
Like coming
I
with.
mean, I was telling Drew
incentives.
earlier, some of these comments that we've been having and talking about is about, the Texas is a private property state, right? And so the pride and the ownership of that property belongs to that individual, and if you're willing to give it up or to work with somebody, great for you. The city can't always force people to do that. And we're not in the private industry business, though we do like to facilitate growth and we like to help it and bring plans like this to the group for us to think through and motivate people to have good ideas. But that's really not the function of a city, is to own properties and do things of that nature.
Right.
We're more of a facilitator.
No,
So along those lines and with Windstream, we have talked to them and we Mr. Rector says we do better at talking to them. We have their phone number.
Right. No, and that's why I was asking, is I know the conversation has happened before, I just couldn't remember what the outcome of that conversation was, so.
We haven't made any progress with that, but
We could
probably
certainly
reach it out
try again,
Yeah.
right?
Keep calling.
Yes, that
Come
is,
with,
that
come
that
with
is
some
our purview.
ideas,
yes.
try to come up with, are there ways to minimize risk, and then can you take those to them first, rather than just saying, what do you think? Like, actually come with some thoughts about how to mitigate some of their issues.
Maybe purchase a portion of the parking lot instead of the whole thing.
Or use some of the Tirz funds that they're in to make their parking lot really pretty and then have a 50-50 agreement with the city to
Yeah.
allow parking after 5.
Yeah, that was kind of my question. I know we're kind of off in the weeds here, but like, is that something that, us as a Tirz board could look at possibly
That's what I'm.
talking about, using some of our funding to incentivize some of that?
You could bring that as a proposal.
Looking
to
at the
Tirz and
details
we could
guy
talk
over there.
about it.
So those things are certainly on the table, right? So the Tirz funding is separated out into like 6 different categories, and depending on how the board wants to pursue it, yes, absolutely, that's certainly something. I mean, it's a carrot for them, they're gonna do what they're required to do, and if it's easy for them to just say no, it's ours, we need it, and could very well be true, but it could be empty spaces for 99% of the time, but one day they'll need it. If they don't have it, their lawyers are going to say, don't give it away. But we could certainly put some, that is partly what that Tirz is there for,
What was your question?
Yeah.
No matter what.
So going back to the temporary
forgot
street
you said that.
closures and the
Yeah,
routing,
that's a
so not to misconstrue what I'm about to ask, I wholeheartedly agree with what he's saying.
Okay.
But to what extent could it possibly open up a business owner to liability in the event there's an accident and they have customers sitting out in the street or whatever, and someone runs into them with a car or something? Does that now open the city up to a lawsuit, the business owner, whatnot? Because now you opened up the street and
Yeah, I mean, if
customers are now sitting out in the street and.
a cone is set out with like some caution tape up, we're all liable to get in a lot of trouble, right? So there's some more permanent measures that you can put in place, right, that are not permanent, but they're, real actual guardrails and, concrete, barriers that would allow for seating and would minimize that, There's ways for us to accomplish that. Cities do it all over. This is not new, right? I think I'm new to Kerrville. I've only been here for 3 years. My recollection of this past conversation was it was attempted and shot down vehemently. I don't have all the details, but I love the idea. If you take what Francisco's has at that corner and you push that up, that whole street block and open it up, that's a fantastic concept. But how much space do we have, and what's the bandwidth for making it a one-way area, or reducing those parking spaces? Now everybody has to park over the parking garage, which is very close, by the way, from a walkability standpoint, very, very close to Earl Garrett. But I understand the psychology of not liking that opportunity. So, we want to hear all ideas, and then we will turn around and we will we can make plans for what those ideas look like. We want y'all's input. That's all we need. We love it. We don't want to have the idea. We want y'all to have the idea.
Earl Garrett, it has the double parking, water does not. So how you close it is also
Also gonna be important, because then there's no parking spaces
Right.
for us. It doesn't go to a 50%, it goes to 0. Unless it's the Shriner side, the one Shriner building side, which I don't know if that's even feasible. And then you can't put your business patio table out there, so there's two sort of animals here, the Earl Garrett and then the water.
But you can change.
And real quick,
I want to go back to my thought about urgency and priorities. And what I've heard about the Windstream property is a vague, nebulous, could be 100 different things. And let's have somebody from the city go talk to them. About what? I think you don't just go and ask something, you have a dialogue. But I think that in this planning mode that we're in, it's like molding together a number of ideas. When Bill brought up the idea of the urban wall, which a lot of people will be horrified, a lot of businesses don't like it until it happens. But you can't just do that without the other piece. It has to be systemic, not just this project, that project. And I think between the Tirz board and the Main Street board, there could be more discussion about what is it specifically that you might want to talk to Windstream about, and not just have somebody from city planning, but have a group that represents the community for a dialogue, not a ask, but a dialogue about that. Because when I look at everything we're talking about downtown, that's about the only property left that is significant, that is underused, and could be very highly creative and exciting for all parties, including the people who own the property. Why should they give up ownership necessarily? They could benefit from it. So it's my, okay, I've talked too damn much.
but to
I
that
have a
point
plan.
exactly,
I have a plan.
a lot of what today's discussion is gonna be is taking these ideas. Caitlin and her team will go back and come up with some implementation plans or some action items, and we can start dialing in some of those details.
Yeah,
That's
and
all
who
good
does
feedback.
them, and,
I think your thoughts about that property are the most intelligent I've heard about how you incorporate marketing, living.
We need to focus on the job that they're doing.
And then.
Number one. Number two, I think we all live over here. I live in Kerrville for 7 years.
It's not very.
In downtown, Saturday Sun is dead. And the city says, we're gonna, economic development, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do that. So far, I haven't seen zero. So, let me give you some idea. I like to bring a group over here.
Going in here, so you're driving.
It's gonna cost me probably $70,000 to bring a group, dance group, to fill downtown at least for July the 4th. Because people are bored with the same thing every 4th of July. They don't even come anymore. I don't know if you all see that or not, I don't have no idea. How can we find that? We can bring these groups, dancing groups, put them in the theater that we have, charge them, put them there is a high school has a stadium, charge them, and make them have them July, 4th of July, make their concert in downtown, open area. We need the people who can generate energy, have a vision. We don't. We're talking about closing a street, closing for what? Who's gonna come? We have to have an event where all these businesses, not only in Earl Garrett, all around Carrollville, can benefit and generate energy, business, more tax for the city, and also the business can have more money. We don't have that. And we're gonna speculate, let these people finish their work, and then we can discuss the rest, maybe whatever we can help them.
Right.
But if we all gonna have to protect our own little kitty bag, the city is gonna be the same 50 years from now. We're gonna talk about, but 50, maybe we're gonna talk $200, I don't know. We're gonna talk and talk and talk, there is no action. We need to act yesterday, not today, yesterday. Because there is business over here, they get a special cater, and the other business, they don't. So we need to treat everybody the same. And I speak over here as an immigrant. The city did not give me money. I bring money over here to the city. Okay, so I'm not begging the city. So what I'm saying is, we need to bring events so we can all benefit. We need to build for the senior citizens, condominiums and shops where they can just walk, have their pedicure, manicure, whatever necessities they need. We don't have a services. Let these people work to finish their work, and I'm gonna shut up and that's it. Go ahead.
Just so everybody understands, this meeting is about downtown, and it is about the 50,000-foot view and planning for the future. There is certainly a conversation to be had about tomorrow and what needs to happen yesterday, and city council meeting is a perfect place for that. But this one is for what is the document that everybody is gonna use 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, when they have to make a decision on where they're gonna spend those funds. So it's easy to get wrapped up in that small little piece, right? Just remember that this is about that vision for what downtown, just this piece right here. Couple hours, we're gonna do a full citywide piece, and then we have the community thing. But right now, this is for this downtown piece.
Yeah, I think there's a good point that you made about, for what, for why. And so it's like, I think that's a good thing to keep in mind as we go forward in these recommendations is to what end? It's not just doing something because we want to do it, but it's what is it actually going to accomplish and for what reason are we doing these things? So I like that. Yeah. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
can use it, but
I think,
we can give it an input.
Yeah.
But what we'd like to see is when you're gonna finish.
yeah, but I think that's a good lens for us to keep in mind as we finish our work is why are we recommending the things we're recommending? Yes, I think that's good. All right, anything else? All right, well, we really appreciate all of the input. We got some really good ideas, a lot more exciting things to add to this framework plan. And we'll get into some of those more details and things, and then have that draft plan, like I said, in the next kind of 4 to 6 weeks. And then we'll have another one of these meetings to talk about kind of that next piece. That is intended to be virtual, I think, Drew. So I'm not sure what the logistics on that are, but that'll be sometime in like March. We'll be looking at doing that meeting.
You want to post this presentation on the website so that we can actually study it
Sure.
with some time and
Yep.
make some more thoughtful thoughts.
And for prior to that next meeting, since it'll actually be like the draft, kind of the draft plan, we can put that out prior so people can look at it, have time to digest it, and then have the meeting. Because since that'll be like the last meeting before it goes to council, so we want to make sure.
But is that the one you're saying is virtual?
It's gonna be, that wasn't originally the intent. I mean, we can talk to Drew about whether it makes more sense to make it in person. I have a feeling because that first one, we ended up kind of having some weird stuff with that one where like we were here in person, but then like they ended up talking without us here and then we got the recording. So we'll talk to Drew about that, see if it makes more sense for us to just do that one in person.
Alright.
Wonderful.
That's it, you can close this out.
Ready to close?
Sure.
Anything else? Do I hear a motion?
Motion.
Second? Second. Meeting is closed at 2:59.
Thank
you all.
Thank you for cheering, Bruce.